be a Christian and a scientist. Let's talk about it. Bless you for coming on for the third time, Mr. Aaron. And to finish this, one of hopefully many talks in the science realm, stuff that I'm actually not so great at, but you've helped me over the years. You've explained some wonderful thought processes. You've explained even some forms of quantum physics, which I, again, appreciate because you're talking to more or less a 10, 12-year-old when it comes to science. I would love to also in the future talk historical science as well as futuristic problems that maybe even you're trying to solve. But for now, we should finish this main part. We've done the measuring side of things. We have done some of the thermodynamics, and now I think we're moving into that part where it's the clash of your mind and your theology and your morals and values. But before we continue, what's your high and low of the week?
I guess the high is, it's been vacation time, holidays, so just relaxing. The low is I've been relaxing a lot and not keeping to my 3 meals a day.
Ah,
So just got to work on that.
is it you don't eat enough or you eat too much?
No, it's more like I forget to eat.
Oh, I wish I had that problem.
Yeah. I forget to eat. So instead of having 3 meals a day, sometimes I just have one or two, and it's mostly when I have the one meal, it's like, oh, I didn't eat anything at all today.
Mm.
It's distracted doing other things. Yeah, stuff to work on.
Okay, but is that a going off topic right to start? Uh,
Yeah,
is uh, is it one of those things where you're getting enough nutrients? Because like when you get that once a meal day, like you're
yeah.
actually entering into like some ketosis and allowing yourself to get some intermittent fasting on the go. Do you find that if you do have that meal, is it a really good, hearty, heavy protein meal that can give you sustenance and all that jazz with some carbs and everything else that goes along with it? Or you kind of just all of a sudden go at it?
No, it's like if I have the meal, it's more to satisfy my hunger more than
Okay.
anything else. So it's ever in the fridge, just cobble up a meal together, and yeah,
Well, I can say this, and I'll tell you this offline as well. But if you can lean into that
yeah,
superpower that you have to not eat and then eat something amazing, good, that's satiating and healthy for you, like of course have your slice of pizza along with it, but you have a lot of calories to enjoy. So anyway, topic for another time. But yes,
yeah.
the highs and lows of the week, right? And so I didn't ask you this last time, but what's your favorite TV show, movie, anime, piece of art of all time, if you have one off the cuff?
Yeah, well, I like art. I like the medieval, really old art to
Mhm.
see how the painters visualize the scripture.
Mm. Oh yeah.
So for example, like Saul grabbing his spear to kill David as David is playing the harp.
Right.
That's captured in a lot of art pieces. So I kind of like that. That's what I
Okay.
like. My favorite, I'll have to think about it. I don't really have a
Mhm.
good one on the spot right now. I do like art that is realistic, like realism. So just think of medieval art that's realistic. That I like a lot.
Okay. All right. So you definitely got some Renaissance feels on the go and
That's the word. Yes.
the lifelike feels. Okay. All right. That's cool to know. Again, something I didn't know. So I asked the question. It's always good to know. All
Yeah.
right. So we just quickly do prayer time, just to let us enter into the Father as well as just pray for a few things. And if anyone in the chat has any prayer requests, please let me know and we'll pray for them as well. We'll even stop mid cast for that. Prayer time is huge. It's one amazing gateway, one of many gateways, but the main gateway to the Father. And yeah, just for two prayer topics that is affecting our world right now. So I'll just go into prayer. Lord Jesus, just thank you so much for your sacrifice. God, we're just so humbled to be here to meet as we talked about your creation and the things that are imminent in your this time capsule of humanity on Earth and this universe. Lord, I pray that you'd help us to walk forward into the things and topics you'd like us to speak on tonight, and that you'd help Aaron and guide the conversation as he answers these questions, as well as if there's anyone who does have questions, that we'd be able to answer them for the kingdom and to help solidify someone's faith or allow them to ask new questions on any uh, part of the spectrum that they're in when it comes to belief systems. Lord, I just once again pray for the unrest that's going on in places like Syria and Nigeria, where there's either internal war or persecution, and right now Iran, there's a lot of sad death and people who are just trying to have any form of liberation. Whether you'd help us to know how to help financially, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, these different places in different parts of the world, and that you would help each person to know how they help and where, not even the places that I'm specifying now, but just where their calling is to help. Thank you for these wonderful blessings you bestowed. Bless this conversation this night. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So again, in our last chats there, we've talked about the creating measuring tool of science, measuring the Bible's truths, morals, ideals, values, and basic thermodynamics in the Bible. If you haven't watched the last two, there will be a link in the restream, which I will put most likely in the captions. It might be on the video here. And I'll have other playlists going towards the podcast as well. But let's jump back into these questions and let's piggyback off of what we talked on last time. And how would you classify the different scientific ideas?
How would I classify the different scientific ideas? Yes. Okay. So when it comes to not just scientific ideas, but claims, as a scientist, I need to ask myself the question: ultimately, is this claim, true or not?
Mhm,
And what can I do to test if that claim is correct?
mhm,
So let's see. Some claims may not be testable at all. I may not be able to test those claims. So one example that comes to mind is that this universe that we're in is one of an infinite number of universes that are out there. Okay, so it's a science claim that we'll hear, right? The multiverse, and you find these concepts talked about within the scientific community. But as a scientist, I have to ask myself the question: can I test it? Because if by definition one universe and another universe exists, then they can't interact in any way. Because if they did, then they would both be part of the same universe. So if
mhm,
you've got infinite number of universes, then I would almost say by definition they're not interactable. Therefore, I can't test that idea or that hypothesis. I can't come up with an experiment to probe, is there another universe out there? So that's an untestable idea. Now, there's nothing wrong with having that idea. There's nothing wrong with having an idea that is untestable. Doesn't mean that it's not true. But
mhm,
as a scientist, I want to go with the explanation that is the most straightforward at explaining sort of the data that we have, right? So the data is we're in a universe, and one hypothesis is that, okay, or it's one of infinite numbers, but I'm making the claim that I can't really test that. Another class that um, scientific statements will fall into are cyclical arguments. So going back to this question of the origin of the universe, um, some scientists will talk about things like quantum vacuums and quantum fluctuations, that out of nothing you can have quantum, things happen, and then
mhm,
out of nothing stuff will form and happen.
mhm,
And they go on with the mathematics and describe, how that universe would come to be. However, in order to have a quantum fluctuation, and when we talk about universe, we're talking about, the origin of space, time, and matter, essentially. So we're trying to explain the origin of space, time, and matter. And if we use these quantum ideas, what do you need to have in order for quantum mechanics to even exist? Well, you need to have space, time, and matter, right? If you look at the Schrodinger's equation, wave particle duality, Planck's constant, all of these things are based on having space, time, and matter already existing. And so to say
mhm,
that um, I can explain the origin of space, time, and matter using quantum mechanics is circular because you have to presume that it already existed. And then the third class that statements can come into are things that are testable and that are non-cyclical. Right. So that's how I would classify different ideas. Now, I talk about science, but I think any idea that someone presents, um, who's going to win the Stanley Cup? Like a basic idea like that. Your explanation or your prediction will fall into one of those three categories. Either it's non-testable, it's cyclical, or you can test it. So those are the three classes of ideas. And for all of the Nobel Prize physicists and mathematicians, publications that are out there, you don't need a PhD to be able to understand that if someone is making a claim, it's going to be one of those three. And very often, um, I have found that claims that are outside of the Christian or biblical worldview
Mhm.
will fall into either it's not testable or it's a circular argument. Um, but those are the three classes that I think of things when I hear them
So
of
can you give me
ideas.
like a oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you give me a simple example of a cyclical or circular argument, or just something that resonates with you off the cuff?
Yeah, I mean, the example I gave of that quantum fluctuation is one that comes to mind because in my community, it's one that we hear very often. But let's see if I can come up with one.
Or even like a
The
simpler one, like maybe
Yeah, so let me see if I can make one off the cuff here. So the Toronto Maple Leafs um, are the best hockey team because they won the Stanley Cup, and because they've won the Stanley Cup, they're the best hockey team.
mhm,
And it's like the fact that they won the cup makes them the best hockey team, but the fact that they're the best hockey team means that th're going to win the Stanley Cup. It's sort of this circular
I
argument.
see.
I don't know if I can come up with a better one.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
And
but yeah,
especially with the Leafs being so terrible at what they do as a professional team, it's a great one because yes, they're probably
I think they've
we're
won
into
at
the
one
one
point,
one
right?
trillionth of them
At
winning
one point,
again.
they had the cup. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that little that the miniature, the macro, the minor, the macro and the micro. There you go.
Yes.
Man, simple words, simple words. All right, so many Christians say that creation reveals God's character. What qualities of God, precision, beauty, complexity, consistency, become visible when studying the physical world at a micro and nano scale?
Yeah. So I think the water molecule to me is just an astounding testament of sort of God's, how do you say, intellect, creativity. So
Mhm,
we live in Canada, and the temperature gets below freezing, and what happens? Water freezes. But water has this particular property because of its molecular structure, the way that the hydrogen and the atom bonds are just just naturally, angled, and because of how the electrons are distributed about the nucleus, the electronegativity of the hydrogen compared to, sorry, of the oxygen compared to the hydrogen, you end up with this, polar molecule, structural molecule, and as it freezes in a very particular state where, as it becomes a solid, it becomes lighter.
mhm,
Now, not many other compounds out there have that property. It's not
mhm,
just unique to water, but it's rare, right? Like if you freeze something, you take a liquid, you make it a solid, it becomes denser.
mhm,
The solid would sink. Um, but with water, it doesn't have that property. At least in our day-to-day conditions here, you freeze water, it gets lighter, and so because of that, when bodies of water freeze, like lakes, and in Canada we have all these great lakes. When they freeze, the top layer becomes ice, but below that it's still water. and so the fish survive. You've got the whole
Mm.
ecosystem still alive, all the plants are alive. Could you imagine if water had the property where as it froze, it got denser? Then every
Mm.
winter, your lake would freeze and everything in the lake would die, right? Like
Right.
your fish, your plants, everything would
Yeah,
die.
very
There's no
good.
oxygen. Or I'm being dramatic. Maybe they'd go into like deep hibernation or something like that. Who knows? But the water molecule, I think, just the way that the
Mm.
physics is set up in our universe, the fact that water has the properties that it has, that enables life to happen year round, hot, cold, freezing. You can find, life in the Arctic and Antarctica, under the oceans there, just because water has this property that, ice cubes float on water, essentially.
Mhm.
So that's just one example. Another example that I think about very often is our DNA, um, and how it encodes like us. So the DNA is basically this sequence of amino acids that their sequence combination dictates sort of my hair color, my eye color, my height. um, Part of it is based on my diet and my environment and so on, but like a big makeup of who I am, male versus female, all of that, it's in my DNA. And to think about, like, Bible says that God has written out our members in His book.
Mm.
I think it's in the Psalm David says that, God has written all our members in his book, that we are weaved together. He uses that imagery of someone being woven, which is pretty good description of what happens biologically.
Mm.
So we've got amino acids, we got proteins, all of these things that are unwinding the DNA coil, reading out that sequence, making the RNA, and then joining the RNA together to make bigger strands and proteins that fold. Like, how else, wow, to describe it as a library and that we're woven together. Um,
Mhm.
and then at my university, we do a lot of talks on biology, plants, animals. It is a land grant university that I'm at. Think of it as like an agricultural university. It's not just agriculture, but they have a big department there. I love going to the talks where they talk about, how to grow ginger, and just the wonderful way that you can take a seed, plant it in dirt,
Mhm.
and this root grows, or in other cases, a plant might grow, and just like the wonder of that. So I see it in the biological processes. You go to a lake, you take a cup of water, put it under a microscope, and it'll be loaded with microorganisms that are just floating in the water, all alive and all doing their purpose. Um, yeah, so even I'm just going on a tangent here, but even our cells, like the cell membrane, the lipid bilayer, the um uh the proteins that allow water to go through or allow ions to go through, um it's just wonderful to think of how, from the perspective of someone who believes in God, of how God designed and created that. And then I can look at ourselves, the fact that we have two hands and 2 feet and two eyes, and that allows us to have like binocular vision, stereoscopic vision, be able to get depth from our vision, the way that our ears are designed. Like, it's just amazing coming at it from the
Mm.
perspective of, like, God purposely designed this to be the way it is, our teeth and,
Mhm.
and all of that. So I'll sit in on talks, and people will talk about the evolution of humans and how we evolved to stand and have 5 fingers and thumbs, and we evolved to have, like, our eyes are white, with our irises and pupils are a different color, and
Mhm.
how they'll talk about how that was evolved to be that way. But when I'm in those talks, I'm looking at the data and I'm listening to it, but my lens, right, the way that I filter it is I'm looking at it as God purposely designed us that way and did
Mhm.
that. And then you look at the birds, He designed them, the fish, and all creation, all the plants, all the animals. It just thinking of it from the perspective that okay, God did this with a purpose, and we can see therefore the similarities that exist. So if he designed one bird and another bird, and there's similarities between them, I don't necessarily view that necessarily as this must be evolution. I view it more as there's a good design here, and the creator has used it over and over and over. I think of it similar to like a car. I wouldn't say that the Ferrari evolved from the Model T. My perspective would be that the Model T existed and there were some design elements there that were good, and manufacturers just continued to improve upon that design. They didn't, the cars didn't evolve into each other, rather, similar elements exist, but they were implemented by a designer. So the more I go to lectures and talks and seminars, even when I was at MIT and University of Toronto, and researchers would come and give all these talks. It was fascinating to me to look at it through the lens of I get to see in 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 detail that no one else has seen before up until this presenter, is presenting their work of their discoveries of how finely tuned God is in
Mm.
managing and orchestrating and designing and controlling all of these things.
Wonderfully said. And and I don't know how this hits, but there was a professor who was an atheist, and for me, I think we've talked about this before. I think it's a greater leap to maybe have an atheistic point of view than it is to have one of a greater creator, or one who puts things into motion. As it seems like things are they're crafted. I mean, not handcrafted, but crafted in such a beautiful way. And so there was this gentleman who was a staunch atheist, and he actually, from what I understand, he came to know the Lord because, as a biologist and a person who had, I think, a PhD or multiple PhDs in food safety and nutrition, when he
Mhm.
read the book of Leviticus, he said that this was thousands of years ahead of time. Like the science, the understanding of the way that food should be kept, the types of food not to eat and eat, the temperatures. And he's like, this had to be given by our creator. There's no other way around it. So I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, yeah, and I've heard something similar on other topics. In Revelations, it talks about the different stones that make up the foundation of the New
Mhm.
Jerusalem. There are 12 different stones, and diamond is not listed as a foundational stone. But all of the stones that are listed have this very interesting property in that they are able to cross polarize light. So if you were to look
Mm.
at those stones under polarized light, they all look like rainbows, essentially. It's really, really interesting. So there isn't a stone listed that doesn't have that property. And it's
Oh,
not, again, diamond. It's like if you're thinking of
yeah.
precious
No brainer.
stones,
Yeah.
that would come to mind. But if you look at a diamond through polarized light, it's just black.
Oh,
So it's amazing how even in the Book of Revelations, where John is writing the 12 stones that make the foundation, they all have that property that they cross polarized light, which no one at the time knew of that property, not
oh,
for
yeah.
hundreds, maybe 1,000 plus years.
Uh-huh.
I want to go back also with what does creation reveal about God?
Mhm.
God says that He cares about us, and we're not to worry about what we eat, what we wear, things like the clothes that we wear, and so on, because He feeds the birds and He clothes the fields and so on. So His creation says that He provides. I think there is beauty in creation, so that tells us a bit about that characteristic of God as well. Um, it tells us that there's definitely an intelligence behind there. In fact, there's a whole field of engineering called biomimetics. Bio means biology, mimetics means sort of like copying. And
Mhm.
so, engineers will look at structures that exist in nature and copy those structures to then do engineering projects. So, for example, the Nambian desert beetle has this very interesting property. It lives in the desert where it's, dry and arid, and like, how does it get water? Well, it turns out that its back, or its scales, let's say, have these nano structures where water vapor will basically adsorb onto the structure and grow and create droplets.
Mm.
And then the beetle's outer shell is designed so that there are these pathways for the water to then flow towards the beetle's mouth to
Yeah.
then drink it. And so that's biomimetics, right? And so now engineers have learned about these structures, and so they create these powder beds based on that. They put it out in the desert to harvest water from the air. So you've probably seen a lot of these technologies being implemented now. The gecko, with its feet and being able to stick onto very smooth things like glass and so on. Again, that's biomimetics, and engineers have been looking into how does the gecko stick its feet to all these surfaces, and they study down to the sort of the nanostructure of the pads on the gecko's fingers, and then use that to create friction adhesives and things along those lines. Velcro, we use Velcro a lot. I think we've all gone through a meadow and gotten those little fuzzballs stuck to our clothes. It's the same idea. It's just a little hook, and the engineer copied that idea. I'm not saying it's really that idea, but we can see the
Yeah.
similarity there. Structures like bridges and stresses, and they all have inspiration from understanding the lightest way to build a strong structure. Looking at, again, nature for that. Um, some materials for strength, like spider silk, I think is stronger than steel for its mass and so on. Led to the inspiration for Kevlar and bullet protection and all of that. So there's just a lot of genius in nature, and scientists will talk about Mother Nature. Scientists will talk about Mother Nature does this or that, or evolution. But again, thinking what I believe, I view it as God has designed this and made it, and what a testament that we're copying that design for our day-to-day, lives and so on. So yeah, it's pretty wild. So from creation, we can tell God is, yes, present, good, intelligent, and I think purposeful. That it's not all here just by randomness. That because God created it, there is a purpose for it. And then we can look at what creation therefore says about our lives, and there is a
Mhm.
purpose for our lives. And I don't think anyone on the call, well, or watching us, would argue that there is right and wrong. Maybe some people do hold that there is no right and wrong. But where does this idea come from of like right and wrong? Um, I think in nature there is this idea of there are some things that we instinctively know are wrong. Where did that come from? Like all
Mhm.
cultures, we kind of know it's wrong to steal. Where did that come from? Like, why is it? Why do I not uh, think the other way, that it's okay to steal?
Mhm.
If I see something, I take it, and okay, that other person should understand that I saw it and I took it, and the end of story. No, So it's very interesting, and so this idea of, if we think that there are things that are good and there are things that are bad, or if we think that there are things that are just and unjust, then necessarily, in order to keep with that thinking, there has to be a God for that thinking to hold. If someone doesn't believe in God at all, but yet they think that there are some things that are good and some things that are bad, the question, the logical question would be, okay, how do you determine what's good and what's bad? Like, what's that moral law that allows you to separate good from bad? And
Mhm.
then, if you have a moral law that separates good and bad, then why should I agree with that moral law? I might have my own different moral law of what I think is good, what I think is bad. And we see that in our day to day, with politics and so on. One country might think one thing is good, another country might think that same thing is bad.
Mhm.
So if the two countries get together, there are now two moral laws and there's a conflict.
Mm.
So where can we go to get a moral law that's outside of me, outside of you, outside of that other person, that's independent of us, so that we can then use that to determine, what is ultimately good or bad. And the argument is that that moral law comes from God. So if someone says that there are things that are good, things that are bad, they're actually making an argument for there to be a God, in order for them to say that. If they want to be consistent, if they say there is no God, then it is a direct logical requirement that they also cannot claim that there is anything good or bad. It's just the two ideas are in conflict.
Mm.
So creation basically tells us that. So that's very, very interesting.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you for breaking down to what feels like the nano level as well, and bring us back and forth, up and down between the complexities and more the bite-sized chunks to eat the elephant as well. Appreciate that. So we've talked a lot about the scientifical and a little bit about the theoretical. But practically speaking, how can Christians working on a high level of science maintain intellectual honesty while also holding to their quote unquote supernatural beliefs?
Yeah, so as a scientist, you report the data. So when you do your experiments or your research, when I think of science, I think about it being in a lab, because that's how I do my science. But not all science requires being in a lab.
Yeah.
So whatever investigation a scientist is going into, um, they have a duty to do the best that they can to get the best data that they can. Uh, and that's understanding with the resources that they have available. I think that's the scientist's duty, Christian or non-Christian. That's a scientist's duty, right? Get the best data you can with what you have available, and then you report how you got that data, or how you got those how you arrived at your conclusion, and you do your best to account for all the sources of error, and then based on what you have in front of you, you draw your conclusions. Okay. I think being able to do that really doesn't necessarily bring God front and center into that conversation.
Mhm.
So if I'm studying the evaporation of water, and I want
Mhm.
to measure at what temperature does the water evaporate at different pressures,
Mhm.
um, I can do that entire experiment, and I don't necessarily have to bring at all into the conversation God, or the idea of God, or discussion about God. I'm just reporting the data on the experiment, right? And so on. Um, and so I think that's how any scientist should proceed. Now, if I go a next step and I then make an inference from that data about a worldview, about where we came from, why we're here, what's the meaning of life, where are we going. That's where, as a Christian, you have to be somewhat careful of how and what and why you say what you say. If you're working in the field of evolutionary biology as a Christian, and you study bones of different creatures and different layers of the rock, different fossil records, and you see that one creature may lead to another, may lead to another. In other words, you see what someone might interpret as macroevolution, but as a
Mhm.
Christian, you don't agree with that. um, you have to be very careful how you word things, because the scientific community in that world is going to expect you to make a comment about how your data is evidence of macroevolution, right? Or
Mhm.
maybe it's evidence against it. It might be. So depending on the field, you've got to, in a way, respect the expectation of the field to use the
Mhm.
proper language, and so on. So I said in our very first meeting that we had, that there are two worlds in science. There's the popular world, pop culture, and there's the academic world, the academic
Mhm.
culture. What I'm describing is the academic culture. And so any reputable scientist, when you read their works in the academic culture, there is no you can't tell if this person is atheistic or Christian or anything, because they're just reporting on the data. They're just
Mhm.
reporting on what the data concludes, unless their specific topic is geared towards addressing the worldview. But if those same scientists enter the popular culture, then they
Mm.
are very
Fighting for
uh,
life.
yeah, fighting words, right? To push their worldview with the academic data that they studied and had.
Yeah.
But you won't see that discussion in the academic world. In fact, if anyone published a paper in my field, in thermodynamics, I'm just thinking all the journals that I read and publish, physical chem papers, physical letters, physical review, Langmuir, heat and mass transfer. I've read hundreds, if not thousands, of papers. None of them talk about God or no God, right? It's just
Right.
data.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't see any problem there for a Christian or to do science and publish and so on. But they do have to be careful in the academic world, because what you put on social media, if you're okay, I'll use myself. If I'm a professor in evolution biology at a top school, and on my social media, I'm taking my work to say that evolution is false and doesn't exist, and it's all, hogwash, let's say,
Mhm.
then my department chair would have every right to come at me and say, "Hey, you might want to reconsider what you're posting, because it reflects on understanding in the world of science." Now, whether or not I agree with that consequence is to be debated, but I think we do have to exercise restraint and wisdom in um, how we publish our views. In fact, some schools may have rules, frankly, totally against even discussing the idea of whether or not there is a God. That despite the fact that they may have departments of philosophy on campus. But yeah, it boils down to Christians can do absolutely very, very good science. And some are bold to talk about God. Isaac Newton, I think a lot of his work is like, after discovering the laws of motion, um, it's like, yeah, after studying the laws of motion and looking at the orbits of the planets, I can't think of any way for these planets to get into their orbits other than the Creator having put them there.
Mhm.
That's Isaac Newton's conclusion from his work. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but
Mhm.
in those early Renaissance days, they definitely talked about God and so on in their publications. But it's not the norm anymore to necessarily do that.
Okay. So if I was to sum it up then, because a lot of daily nuggets would be living out your daily job as pretty much any other job. A scientist, you're just living it out. You're not going to just go around, bringing God to the forefront of everything you bring up at a supermarket, or if you're in IT or whatever it might be. There are the people, like in any realm of work life, that will be a quote unquote professional, but a professional person who's taking it to the social media realm, so that it's the work versus the social life. So like the real professionals versus the social media heads. And more or less, I think what you're driving at is, there are rules, in the law of the land, and it kind of takes away from the scientific exploration in the classroom. And so, outside of renouncing God, we need to be tactful as Christians, anyways, in our day to day living. I'm sure Paul wasn't, printing pictures of Jesus on his tents, right? um,
Right.
sorry?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And one of the ways that you can get someone to think about these questions is to ask questions about,
Mhm.
how accurate is this conclusion? How did they arrive at this conclusion? Is there any data that would challenge those conclusions? Those are all scientific questions, and I'm not pushing an agenda, but it allows a person to be open to the idea that whatever they hold firm into their beliefs, um, they shouldn't just blindly do that. They should be aware of the holes in what they believe. So when I do, talk to evolutionary scientists about evolution, one of the questions that I'll ask them is, "Are there any holes in the theory?"
Mhm.
And of course there are holes. Of course there are, things that are out there, data points that challenge the evolutionary point of view, um, that are showstoppers even for the evolutionary point of view. Are they aware of those data points? And if they are, they'll say, "Yeah, they're aware," and that's great. But more surprising are those who say they're not aware of any holes in the data or the theory. And that's where it opens up the door to maybe share some other works that are out there, that challenge those concepts. So it's always good to ask questions. Even
Mhm.
instead of making a statement, you ask a question and let that person arrive at their conclusions based on on what they find in the answer to that question.
So just the typical always drilling down, getting people away from regurgitating the information that they believe is theirs and actually going into the critical thinking of what they believe. That
Yes.
that sound right?
Now,
Okay.
yeah,
Mhm.
and at the
Please
same
go ahead.
time, it's sometimes not possible to do that. So I'll give you an example. There are a lot of satellites orbiting the Earth, and some of them, measure, let's just say, sun activity, for example. So there are some satellites out there, heliosphere studies looking at the sun, and they publish the results and in papers like Nature and so on, and we can all access those papers and read them. But where did the data come from? How was the data gathered? Where's the raw data? I can drill down, but it's very unlikely that I'll be able to get sort of that level of detailed information.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's just not possible to get at, to if you keep drilling, sometimes you do reach an end, but you haven't reached the end of drilling yet. You could still drill more, but you
Mhm.
can't because you don't have access to that data anymore. So
Mhm.
that is a real thing that happens, and it's normal. But the point is, just because it's published in Nature doesn't mean that because it's there, you don't even read the article, you don't even look at the data, you don't look at how they got the data, you just use the conclusion and go. Because
Mhm.
Nature will have retractions.
Mhm.
Nature and other journals, they do publish retractions, meaning there was an article that they published, peer reviewed scientific article, and eventually someone found a flaw. Maybe
Mhm.
the experiment was flawed, or maybe the data was forged, and so then the publisher will remove that article. So, anyways, uh, yeah.
Right on. Well, again, it's amazing the uh sorry, I should say no, let me retract. Do you have a specific instance where there was a point of view that was pushed and there was a slow retraction, and maybe it was done slyly to keep the concept propped up for a while, and then they inevitably had to like pull the thought process to say this is actually wrong? Or is it there are so many credible scientists out there that if something's wrong, they just admit that it's wrong and they go in with another theory, like you said, the difference between a the theory of evolution versus sorry, the other word that you use, like there's the theory of evolution versus the
Well,
where
the
it's
theory,
actually a fact.
there's law, right? Like
Law,
in
yes, law.
science, we think about theory, we think about law.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about an example that comes from my career. So again, I studied water evaporation, and you would think by now we would understand the full theory of how water evaporates. And so there's one area of research called classical kinetic theory. Basically, it treats gases as simplified solid spheres that are bouncing around. They hit each other, and some of them, some are elastic collisions, some are plastic collisions. So think of billiard boards. Okay, so imagine gas molecules that are like pool balls, and they're
Mhm.
they're hitting each other constantly. So that's classical kinetic theory. And if you think of gases that way, you develop a theory of how water evaporates.
Mhm.
Now, in my PhD work, I modeled water evaporation using quantum mechanics. And in quantum mechanics, there's a slightly different view because now I'm dealing with probabilities that molecules are in the liquid and they eventually go into the gas or vapor phase.
Mhm.
So the two concepts are different. And how do you determine which one is correct? Well, you got to run experiments, do very careful experiments. And it turns out that the two theories have two very different predictions. Classical kinetic theory predicts that as water evaporates, the interface, the liquid interface, on the liquid side and on the vapor side will be roughly the same temperature.
Mhm.
Quantum mechanical predictions predict that the liquid side interface will be cooler than the vapor side interface by
Mhm.
as much as 5 to 15 degrees for different conditions of evaporation. So the two predictions are different. One is predicting basically no, we call it a temperature jump. So classical kinetic theory predicts a very small temperature jump. Quantum mechanics predicts a larger temperature jump. We do the experiments, very careful experiments, and lo and behold, we discover that temperature jumps exist across the interface during
Oh, wow.
evaporation. So the existence of the temperature jumps by necessity means that the classical kinetic theory model of evaporation is incorrect. Now, we have this massive set of data. So other scientists have read the work, they disagree, they repeat the experiments, they get the same results that we get, temperature
Yeah.
jumps and so on. So classical kinetic theory does certain things well. It talks about effusion of molecules and so on. Um, but there's 130 years of publications pushing classical kinetic theory forward as the explanation for how water evaporates. But the theory has fitting constants. They're known as empirical constants.
Mhm.
You imagine that you're plotting the data, you're fitting a curve through it, and the shape of that curve, um, you can have any shape fit that data because you have two empirical constants. So one of the it's a little I may be sounding a little complicated, but basically it boils down to you have one equation and two unknowns in those equations, which means that there's an infinite number of solutions, which
Okay.
means that there isn't a unique solution.
Because
Whereas
usually
in
it's usually like y plus x equals b or whatever, right? But in this case, it's
Yeah. So if
b
I
and then
say, as an
Mhm.
example, if I say x plus y equals 5, give me the value of x and y,
Yeah,
there's an infinite combination, right?
right.
That's what classical kinetic theory boils down to. It's one equation, two unknowns. There isn't a unique solution.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
basically, it means we know nothing, right? We know nothing. That's
Yeah,
what the theory ultimately boils down to. But in quantum
right.
mechanical theory,
Yeah.
there is zero fitting parameters. There's no empirical constant in that equation, but yet it matches the experiments. So, you take the whole of what I'm describing to you. We have massive evidence to support the quantum mechanical description of evaporation, and that
Mhm.
same massive evidence therefore disproves classical kinetic theory, but yet the community is very slow and reluctant to accept those findings because it
Wow.
means that if we're correct, it means
Yeah.
that all of that work is incorrect, right? And so,
Mm.
just talking through my career, getting that work to be published took a long time. So the work was published in Chemical Reviews, which is at the time it was the top scientific journal for the field,
Mm.
and it was eventually published there. So yeah, I dived a little bit into the hardcore science. I don't think people are going to like that so much, but that's an
Yeah, it's
example
wonderful,
that
man.
I've
No,
lived
it's
through.
fantastic.
Yeah, that's an example I've lived through where um, the scientific world has had proper experiments to disprove what they currently think is true, but yet they're reluctant to do that. Yeah.
All right. Makes sense, man. Thank you for taking the deep dive. Because again, in future, people are going to be watching this off the cuff, and there's going to be, I've met so, especially where I work with engineers, I work with PhDs, and I can always draw on this and send them your way. And that's the beauty of the body of Christ. Everyone's so different, and the deep dives. there's the well people, and then there's the people like me. We're chilling in the shallow end of the pool, and we got kilometers around us. So, like treading light. But thank you for going deep. I absolutely appreciate that.
Good.
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah. So how has your journey across space, science, engineering, your faith shaped how you understand purpose, calling, and the human role in exploring God's creation?
Yeah. I find space to be fascinating because the Bible says that if you want evidence, if you want to see evidence of God, the invisible God, if you want to see the invisible God, look up at the sky, and the stars and the planets themselves proclaim that there is a God. Um, and so studying astronomy, we learn things about the redshift. We learn things about the origin, of the universe is expanding and accelerating. And all of these findings beg the question of like how did it start? Where did it come from? And so it ultimately leads to a discussion about whether or not there is a God. And some of the popular science shows out there, when they talk about the origin of life and so on, I don't know how many shows within the first 10 to 15 minutes where they talk about that question, God comes up in the conversation because
Mhm.
it's like unavoidable
Mhm.
to be looking at the stars. The James Webb Telescope is one of the most advanced telescopes that we've created and launched up to space, and it is challenging some of the strongly held views of how the universe came to be. And it is more and more converging towards the description of the biblical account, which is what I find fascinating. Now, the other thing that I love about space sciences is microgravity sciences, where things are weightless and floating. Microgravity allows us an opportunity to turn off certain physical processes and to study them in ways that we just can't do here on Earth. So, for example, if I wanted to study how, again, boiling or how liquids evaporate, on Earth, we have something that's known as natural convection. This is the idea that hot air rises, and as it rises, it displaces cold air. Cold air goes down, and it creates this natural convection effect. And this exists in your oven. When you're cooking in your oven, sometimes
An
there's a
air
fan in
fryer.
there. Yeah. Sometimes there's a fan in there to help blow things around. But
Yeah.
when you're in space, natural convection disappears. There is no more natural convection. And
Mhm.
so hot air stays where it is and cold air stays where it is. Um, Looking at how a candle burns, we're all familiar, I
Mm.
think, with what a birthday candle looks like on Earth. That the shape of the flame, the color of the flame, even the size of the flame, we have an intuition for what that birthday candle looks like. But
Mhm.
if you burn that same candle in space, that is, you remove the effective gravity, the flame ends up being spherical and it ends up being blue. It's a blue flame and it's spherical,
Oh.
right?
Does
And
that have anything
so
to do with methane or anything like that, or is it just?
no, no, it just has to do with natural convection no longer exists, and so the flame is starved for oxygen. So it
Oh,
burns blue because it just doesn't have enough oxygen to burn brighter. At
okay.
this point, the molecules are limited by diffusion. Can they diffuse across basically the products that have already been burned to provide fresh oxygen to the flame to keep it going?
Right.
And
Okay.
similarly, when you burn, the product of what's burned has to diffuse away to not extinguish the flame, and so you end up with this blue hemispherical cap. So that's another interest that I have, is just studying how these physical processes that we're so used to, how they
Mhm.
behave very differently in space flight, and then thinking about what that means. Like, what does that mean for how would you live on a different planet? How would you set up cooking? To be quite frank, how would you set up cooking on the moon? Your recipe for baking might have to be revised in terms of how water content or how long it's baked or the temperatures. Um, so yeah, so I'm just fascinated by these questions. And like I said earlier, it's not like I'm baking a cake and I'm thinking about, okay, the wonders of God. It's like I'm just, baking a cake to eat the cake.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, right? It's curiosity driven research.
Mhm.
Just curious about how gravity impacts, our world. And a big question is, can we survive in microgravity? Can we live for 5 years in space? Or
Mhm.
would all our bones disintegrate, and would I lose vision, and would my organs, start to fail?
Mhm.
It's just a fascinating question. And if we can live, in outer space, what does that mean for exploration? Um, yeah, there's a whole lot to discover in our world. And I think that is fantastic. From rocks to stars to you know creatures, they keep finding new species. It astounds me how many new species are found every year, even in 2025. Plants and insects and all these birds and all these different. There's
Mm.
just so much to explore. So I think that's great, and I find that fascinating, and I think it's God's glory. The more that we discover, the more I learn a bit more about how God and what God has created.
Mm. So two quick sub questions off of that, because we're talking about the stars and living on a planet. Did you watch the movie The Martian with Matt Damon, and how are you feeling about that? Was that somewhat scientifically accurate, or not a chance?
Um, the short answer is, how did the remember the windstorm and
Yeah.
how it blew off the antenna and so on. Like even that was inaccurate because
Mm.
like the density of air on Mars isn't that high. So
Mhm.
that massive windstorm would probably not have done the damage that they're portraying it would have done.
Interesting.
But in terms
Okay.
in terms of accuracy, it's much better than many other sci-fi movies I've seen out there. So yes, I've definitely heard in our scientific community, like people love the movie The Martian because it takes care as much as it can to preserve the science, the technological limitations. We're not seeing like quantum communication, in that movie. We're seeing they're actually using, regular communication. There's a delay, they got to wait and all that stuff. So yes, it is fairly realistic to the point of realizing that no one has ever been on Mars yet. So that part definitely isn't realistic. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I liked it. It was entertaining. I might actually need to watch it again. It's been a while since I saw it.
Yeah, I'll ask you about it next time. That'd be cool to do science films. So, like, how did you like Interstellar then? Is that the most accurate? I've heard that it's really accurate at times.
Interstellar, enjoyed it up until the point where it became metaphorical. The bookcase.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't. Yeah, I guess I don't have to worry about spoiling it because the movie's, it's been out long enough that the viewers should have seen it already. But yeah,
Yeah,
when it
yeah,
got to
I'll say
that
this.
point.
Spoiler alert, if you want to turn away, do it now or fast forward. I'll make a plot in the video and you can go past a minute or two and come on.
But there is one part of the movie well, two parts which I really, really thought went above and beyond. Number one, the black hole. The way
Mhm.
that the black hole looked in that movie, astrophysicists actually calculated it for the movie itself.
Mm.
So that is probably one of the most accurate representations of a black hole that you will see on the movie screen. So that was one. And then the second thing was when they did the decision to land, and they're like, this maneuver is going to cost us, however many years. That is so true, right? Because of the idea of general relativity, time passes slower or faster, depending on whether or not you're near a massive gravitational object or not. And it
Mm.
turns out that they for them they just went through a couple days or maybe a couple hours, but back on Earth, like decades had gone by, and so that part was captured very well. And actually, just a few weeks ago, there was a journal article published talking about the time delay between Earth and Mars, and how time on Mars will pass, I think it is slower than it will on Earth by seconds or something like that. So that's a real
Because of the
fact.
sun, the distance from the sun.
No, it just has to do with, well, in a way, yes, it has to do with the masses of the planets and so on.
Okay.
And yes, in a way, I would argue yes, the distance from the sun. Yeah, it's Einstein's law of relativity. So time passes differently on Mars than it does on Earth. So if we have two
Mm.
watches all synchronized on Earth, we go to Mars. You go to Mars, I'm on Earth, and then you come back and we compare watches. We're going to have different times because of the gravitational, well, Einstein's, um, laws of special relativity.
Unreal.
So that's been published, which is wild. Yeah.
That is unreal. All right, so the last inter question would be the interstellar comet 3I at Atlas. There's been a lot of talk about that. Do you have any? Just kind of came to mind as we were talking. Do you have any thoughts on that, or because people have been
Well,
hyping it up for different color schemes and all kinds of stuff like that?
yeah. I mean, the short of it is, if you think about what an asteroid is, it's a chunk of mass that low gravity, and this thing is hypothesized to be basically, particles that are stuck together, to create rocks and boulders and dust, and ice. So there's a lot of ice out there, and so a lot of comets we know about the tails of a comet, or the asteroids will have tails, especially when they're near the sun. The sun heats it up, and more of the ice off gases, and you end up with that tail. So if we see these jets coming out of the asteroid, number one, it's what is the source of that jet? Is it a liquid, or is it an ice that's sublimating, right? And so that's one question. And then is the jet getting intenser as it approaches the sun, which would indicate heat is playing a role in the size of the jet.
Mhm.
So as it gets closer and closer and closer to the sun, we would expect there to be stronger and stronger, size of the jet being expelled. And then what is the jet made out of? So this is where you can point your telescope or your hyperspectral imager at the jets to get some idea of the chemical composition of the jet. So some people are claiming that the jets are thrusters and that the asteroid is an alien ship and it's staring itself. It's a theory, and they have equipment on Earth, mainly telescopes, to test that theory.
Mhm.
So I would be surprised if that were the case.
Yeah.
But some very reputable researchers are pushing that as a hypothesis, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like if their thinking, their worldview is that there is other life out there, and this is probably one of the best chances they have to, if ever there's going to be a spaceship appearing, it'll look like that probably, and so they're pursuing it with that lens. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, the data is the data, and so I think it's perfectly fine for someone to think it's a spaceship, another person to think it's just an asteroid. And they got to do the best they can with the equipment they have to get the data to draw their conclusions.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see that sort of discussion happening on social media.
Yeah, and like you had said earlier, there's the scientists versus the social media scientists, maybe, right? I guess, and the people who are pushing not even agendas, but they're pushing their worldviews, their hopes, and they have a big enough platform that
Yeah,
they can sell
and
it. Okay.
and
Mhm.
also it is media. You got to get someone to click on it, look at it, listen to it, and so you've got to have that catchy title or headline or ticker to get someone's attention. And so um, th- I think we all have to be aware that just because the title is there doesn't necessarily mean that's what the scientist is claiming. you know,
Okay, that's true. When you dig down into things, you listen for an hour plus to a podcast, which we constantly keep going into.
yeah,
Then you end up hearing the actual answers, and you hear the at the end they do the little summary, and they're like, "Well, it's probably not this, but it could be," and then they cut scene
mm,
right away because they're hoping
yeah,
people will go right to the end to get the last bit. Okay, that makes sense too. And thank you for clarifying that because I've heard a few people talking about that, and I honestly had no idea. So I'm glad I could ask someone who is as knowledgeable as you are. Before we move on to the last three questions, which are kind of more rapid fire, was there anything else that you wanted to add on to your journey and just exploring God's creation, or do you think you've uh, exfoliated that enough?
Nope, still exploring.
Mhm.
And part of exploring God's creation, I guess for me is also digging through the scriptures and His Word. There is a ton of information in there and details that I would encourage people to read it for themselves and sort of see what it says. It's then they can know what it's about, and if they should just ignore it or otherwise take it seriously. But to rely on someone else, or to rely on a podcast like this, let's say, to 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 make the final claim on what the Bible is about, I think that's very dangerous. I think people should just
Mhm.
read it for themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, and that's a great summary. What or new hypotheses are you particularly excited about? Is there anything that
Hmm.
you've heard, maybe even in the past maybe week or 2 or 5 weeks, that is just kind of got you sitting up in your chair? You'd like to look into it more yourself, paper or something like that?
There's one paper by I think a NASA researcher on the design of a faster than light spaceship. So
Oh,
warp drive,
cool.
basically.
Oh,
And
warp drive.
so
There you go.
they model what the warp drive should look like.
Okay.
And it turns out that the mathematics, for bending time would indicate the warp drive should look like, like your medicine capsules, those ellipsoidal shapes.
Yeah.
It's like three of those together would be sort of like the shape that they think would be ideal for a spacecraft
Mm,
to warp space and time. And there were drawing
interesting.
similarities between it and the USS Enterprise from Star Trek. It's got the two engines in the body, which is like three
Right.
capsules. So that was interesting. And to do that study of like faster than light time travel, it's all math. So you can totally, do the math and come up with the what would be the shape of the spaceship to make it happen. So that's pretty interesting. And then another discussion I've seen, this was a while back, but there's a alternative theory to the Big Bang that is now appearing. This is based on the results that have come through from the James Webb Telescope, which
Mm,
basically is raising serious question with the Big Bang. Everything coming from nothing. So the new theory is that just before the Big Bang, the universe existed in a different state. And we think of like matter, stuff that we can touch and hold.
mhm,
So the new theory is that the universe had a different state that it existed in, and that state got critical, and then transitioned into this real physical state that we have. So
mm,
that's a new hypothesis, a new theory that's coming through from the scientific world, which I think is interesting.
mhm. It from a layperson's perspective, it sounds uh, like a bit reaching, or a bit like it can sound a bit convoluted. I'm sure 100, 200 years from now, if someone was to look at this and science progressed, if there wasn't a massive war and discoveries weren't wiped out or whatever, I'm sure they'd be laughing at the archaicness of our thought, the AI and the internet and all that jazz, right? But it is very, very interesting to see uh, the the bravery that people have in a thought process that, like you said in the past, is not a law but a theory, uh, becomes very dim as you move minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, and centuries away from its original thought. It's pretty profound how prideful people can be, and then you look at it in the future, and it's not even a thing anymore. So yeah, that is
Mhm.
very interesting. I had no idea both of those. That's cool. All right. If you had a topic that if we were going to talk again about in February or March, is there any topic that you'd like to explore or chat about just to whet the beaks
Yes.
of anyone watching? Yeah.
So I think one topic which I like, going back to the art and the Renaissance, is just looking at at how our Western world is very much shaped and influenced by some of these biblical concepts.
Mhm,
Everything from health and diet to architecture to law to
mhm.
music to movies even. I was surprised to learn a little history bit. Ben Hur. I don't know if you know that movie with Charlton
Oh, yeah,
Heston.
absolutely.
So there was a version of Ben Hur before that. It was black and white,
Mhm,
I think in the 1920s or something.
mhm.
From what I remember reading, was the movie studio. I forgot what it was. At MGM movie studio. They were going like basically bankrupt, doing really bad. But then these Christian movies are what brought it out of the bankruptcy. So and I think Ben Hur was an example from 1920s or something being quoted. So I think that's an interesting discussion, right? And I remember Steve, like sometimes when we had Bible studies, was it at Pastor Seacat or elsewhere?
Mhm.
That was one conversation, was looking at movies and the Christian tones that are in the movie.
Yeah,
I think I remember we were talking about the
the
Matrix and
undertow.
stuff. Yeah, yeah. So I think that would be a very interesting conversation, and we can actually bring in maybe some movie buffs in our group to converse. Maybe it could be like a multi-person conversation
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. Absolutely, and that's the hope, from these, initial almost interviews and platforms to establish you all with multiple interviews to give people the opportunity to look back, know who you are as people, which I think sadly, unless you're able to really invest in a social media context, there's not a lot of depth and gravity towards the background of people who are connecting on these types of platforms. And so the hope is that people can lean in, listen in, and in the long term, by God's grace, maybe even meet us in the future and panels and really be able to discuss things and grow and allow iron sharpen iron and to diamond to cut diamond. No one's really, I haven't heard that phrase, so I'm kind of hoping I can coin that in the long term. Not biblical, but it feels close enough. Because diamond's the only thing that can cut diamond, is that correct?
Yeah,
Or
diamonds
almost.
and cut diamonds.
Yeah.
Basically, you're talking about the hardness of a material. So yeah, you need a material that's a little bit harder than the material that you're trying to cut.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure there's like a light laser somewhere out there that can cut a diamond or whatever, right?
That's
But
true. Yeah.
yeah, but diamonds, sharpening diamonds or cutting diamonds, that's it's about the, as nice a metaphor as you're gonna get. All right, so to take all of this wonderful information that you've boxed in for us for the past three and put a little bow on it, if anyone was listening who wants to look deeper into the scientific realm, who wants to look deeper into learning about the cosmos outside of the Bible,
Mhm.
is there any books or material that helped you?
Yeah. So the thing that I would recommend is to go directly to the peer reviewed publications out there.
Mhm,
Textbooks and books that are out there are likely going to be part of the popular culture, which no one is really peer reviewing what's published there. Peer reviewing means
mhm,
vetting that what's written in there is as accurate as it can be, aside from
mhm,
maybe the editor, of the book. If you really want to start exploring the cosmos, my recommendation is start searching journals, reputable journals like Nature, Science, and there are hundreds of journals out there for astronomy. And
mhm,
pick your favorite topic, whether it be heliophysics or astro physics, black holes, whatever it might be, and start reading some of the more recent articles of researchers in that field. And then at the end of those articles, there'll be references that they have cited as they publish their research, and then you can
mhm,
read those citations and then citations of citations and so on. And that's
mhm,
how you can develop your awareness of the science on that topic and
mhm,
the latest science on that topic as well. So I would say that's the place that I would recommend starting. Journals are not the most fun to read, very technical, tons of graphs and diagrams and equations. But even just reading the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusion of those papers, and then moving on to the next ones, would give you so much more of a grounded approach to the science than
mhm.
I think you would get if you were to start reading just textbooks and blogs and so on.
Wonderful. So now, if as we're landing the plane here, if you had just one or two sentences that would uh, that would kind of sum up what you've talked about and the message that you'd like to leave is, I would like to make probably a short that to put out there. What would be that one or two sentences that would bring from your heart a peace and clarity to all the conversations that we've had?
Yeah, I'll say that science is a discipline. And with it being a discipline, there is a right way and a wrong way to do science. And when science is done properly, it allows us to gain an understanding of the world around us and our worldview of who we are, where we came from, where we're going. And in my scientific career, I have found that the worldview that most agrees with the data that I've collected and gleaned from science investigations is the biblical worldview. And therefore, the biblical worldview merits my attention to investigate it further and properly. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the correct worldview, but it just means that it merits my attention to deep dive into it further. And I'll say that my analysis of that task during 6 years of my life, essentially dedicated towards this question, is that my oh my, the biblical worldview is so consistent with the scientific description of our universe. It's just fascinating. So that's the little summary that I would have, and therefore I'm a Christian not because of blind faith, but because there's just this wealth of evidence that that it is more than likely, sorry, that is more likely than not conveying the truth that there is a God, that there is a heaven, there is a hell, that there is a judgment day coming, and that there is only one salvation, one way to be saved, and that's through the finished work of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you for summarizing that. It's a lot after probably about 5 hours of conversation over the past three. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your time as a whole. So I think we'll just finish up with prayer. We didn't get a heck of a lot of questions. Actually, I don't really think too many, if any, this time around. So, we probably get to have a bit of an early exit tonight. But
Mhm.
by God's grace, and if anyone is watching into this replay of the video, if you do have a question, please ask it. Or if you have a prayer request, please share with it, because I haven't missed a comment yet, and I'll pray for those. Aaron hopefully will pray for those as well. I'll send it to him if they come along. And those questions I can definitely pose the next time he's on, which will probably be in maybe late February or March or somewhere in there, whenever his busy schedule allows. So, unless there's anything else, Aaron, you'd like to share, I'll go into prayer. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
No, I think we're good. I think another topic though that I'll leave you with is the
Yeah,
question
please.
of like, where does evil come from? Why is there evil? That might be a good question to
Oh,
dive into.
sure. Oh, absolutely. That's and you know what I mean? Like, it's a great question to ask you individually and on a panel as well. So there will be overlap, and it's beautiful because having multiple-headed beasts in that sense is
Mm.
always great to dogpile on in conversation and thought process. And again, hopefully, the viewers and/or listeners can lean into that, and even with the beauty of the world we live in, chatting, or even in the future, God willing, calling in and asking questions as well. So yeah, I definitely would love to look into the implications of the creative world, the scientific world, the social world, the psychological, and of course the baseline for all of the beliefs of the biblical and God views. So yeah, absolutely. And if there's any more, you know where to find me.
Yeah, that's all.
Wonderful. All right, so I'll just quickly end in prayer. We'll cap it off, and unless someone has a random question by the end of it all, then we'll cap off for the night. God, thank you. Thank you for giving Aaron such a wonderful, uh, mechanical, philosophical, spiritual, just focused, laser focused mind to study the intricacies of the universe, physics, and the different theories that come along. I pray that he would help on even more consistent basis the people in his field, the people who are really asking the deep questions, not even about the science realm, but about their relationship with you. Thank you, Jesus, again for allowing us to enter into brotherhood with you, to be able to connect with you as a part of the Godhead. And I just pray, Holy Spirit, that you would either convict people who are watching for the first time, or that you continue to nurture us, help us in that pursuit of sanctification. Thank you again for Aaron's time, and I pray that this vodcast will be a blessing to many more others as it's replayed. I just want to also ask you, Holy Spirit, if there's anything that we've said that's wrong or that's not from you, I pray that you take it out of the viewer or listener's minds, and that you would also help us and correct us through them or through someone else or through your precious Spirit. Thank you so much for everything, oh Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. If you'd like to watch anything else on the channel that has to do with podcasts, vodcasts, or if you'd like to take a look at, I'm going to try to put up two playlists here. Anything on breaking addiction. I have a 30-step program into breaking addiction. I'll be releasing a book, I should say, at the mid to end of 2026. I can't believe it's 2026, almost 2025. That's a 30-step toward healing from your addiction from the inside out. I've been working on it for 10 years now. And by God's grace, just putting the dots on the I's and the crosses on the T's, and making sure all the pastors and psychology folk are on the same page as myself, and that I'm not hurting anyone on the way. But if you'd like to look at any of those types of videos, they will be in the playlist right above here. I just want to say thank you again to Aaron for being here today. And I just am so thankful that you've been here to watch. And thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a wonderful day, evening, morning, or night. Oh, ask him how he lost weight. Oh, okay. Looks like we're almost done. We almost got out of it.
Well, that was the first part where I'm like, I haven't been eating. Not purposely not eating. It's just I've been going through my day and forgetting to eat, and so maybe that's what you're seeing. I don't know.
Yeah, the intermittent fasting kind of thing, which is a fantastic topic. And Aaron, if you have to go at any time, please let me know. I know you're starting up the university schedule tomorrow. But yeah, so with that living, the main thing I think is that obviously he's going into natural ketosis, which is great. It comes from like the thought process of the ketogenic type diet. And then if you have if you're doing any form of fasting within the beautiful 24-hour clock that God has given us on this time frame. I know that if we were on Jupiter, it'd be probably minutes or hours difference in time.
I'm going to step out, Steve.
Well, of course,
All right.
of course.
See ya. Thanks so
Have a
much for
great
having
one.
me.
No
Bye.
worries. Makes better curry. Guyana, I would say Guyana, Trinidad. It's pretty close. It depends on where you get it from and who you get it from. Yeah, definitely. Better curry. And it depends on the type of curry. I would say Trinidadians make better chicken curry, and I would say the Guyanese make a better beef curry. But that's just me. Love the different curries and selections. Let me just pull my chair up. I was just trying to be on the same level that he was there before. But yeah, I'm ready to roll here. If anyone else has any comments or questions or thoughts on tonight. But yeah, the intermittent fasting. I've been on and off intermittent fasting for about, I don't know, 12, 13 years now. I used to do 40-hour fast, 50-hour fast, just water and coffee. Now I do, some days I'll go 16, 18, 20 hours, but usually it's like 12 to 14, no, maybe 13 to 15-hour fasts. Like sometimes 12 if it's a Saturday and I'm with my family and want to make sure that I break bread with them and spend time with them, especially my daughters don't see me as much as they could. I try to make sure that I carve out 4 to 5 hours a day with them every day, and then spend time with my wife during that time. And then in the evening, we have a couple hours to ourselves. But yeah, it's one of those things for me, and everybody's different when it comes to intermittent fasting. You have to know your body. A lot of women, it's intermittent fasting is not the greatest thing that you can that women could do for their bodies with their blood sugar, the blood loss that they have, the iron levels, hitting menopause. But historically, for women and stereotypically, doing intermittent fasting between the hours of usually 6 p.m. till maybe 8 or 9 a.m. the next morning, but getting a breakfast is crucial for women. But for guys, we also, even if you do miss the breakfast, which I don't, I'm not a big fan of doing breakfast in general. I feel sluggish. I feel weak. I don't get into the right mindset. I feel like I have that cortisol hit and I'm just like focused till around 11 or 12 when I have my first coffee. And I usually have a milky coffee because I have some stomach acid issues. But when I do the intermittent fasting that way, 5, 6 times a week, then it really helps me to just not feel terrible. So you just got to kind of listen to your body, but don't do it consistently because it'll really mess up your cortisol levels over time. Uh, is fasting necessary to maintain weight loss? No, it's not. It definitely is not. So fasting is just a tool of uh, fasting is just a tool of burning energy or calories. Usually, with a stricter time frame, you have the chance. Now, there's the ketosis aspect of not eating for a certain amount of time or suppressing your carbs and so on and so forth to start ripping away at the fat. And with the lack of carbs in your body, then you're not retaining the water. So you'll see when people go on a carnivore diet or ketosis diet, or sorry, ketogenic diet, their bodies will start to just really just lean down quick. But that's because they're not retaining water. And over time, there's a on Netflix, there's a Liver King documentary where the guy was, he's doing he was doing steroids, but there's people who have been doing the carnivore diet for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then you see that there's in some people there's a drop off in their nutrition, even though people say that the beef would be a complete food, or there's been a lot of studies that have that have stated that you can be a complete carnivore and live a fantastic, wonderful long-term life. There's tribes who do it. It does compromise other parts of, I'd say, your body over time. I don't have the science in front of me to back that up, but I've just seen so many professionals who've gone one way or the other for a long time, and their body ends up conking out at them. So if you're just joining us, the professor, Dr. Aaron Persad, just left. We were talking about science for the past hour and a half. He had to go, so we're just talking about food and nutrition now. So you were saying that I feel hungry if I do. So yeah, don't do it. Just consistently have meals as you go, or have snacks. Just the main thing is that if you want to lose weight, maybe 4 or 5 days a week, have a calorie restriction day, and don't or calorie restriction days, and then try your best to have a day where you're at around the main line of calories and try not to go over. But the main focus, like how I lost the over what was it, the over 100 kilograms that I lost, or the 120 pounds, was that I ate foods that I actually liked. And that the whole 120 pounds, 50 sorry the 120 pounds, or 50 kgs I should say, not 100 kgs. That's a lot. The 50 kgs or 120 pounds that I lost, that was eating the foods that I loved. I did some intermittent fasting, but it took 3 years, and that was fantastic for my body. What are your maximum weights you use at home? So I do a lot of body weight stuff. You can just kind of see right there is my amazing 500-pound rated pull-up bar. So I use a lot of the bands. My resistant bands, probably can do about 250 to 300 pounds of resistance. But because I'm about 210 myself, doing the pull-ups, chin-ups, knee-ups, dips, all of those different exercises, hangs, I'm basically throwing around 200 pounds at any given time. And so just doing proper push-ups, doing, lunges, like I do have, 230-pound barbells as well. I'm actually going to buy one of the attachments to make it into those dumbbells into kettlebells. It's just a plastic attachment. I saw it on Dragon's Den. I want to pick it up at some point. I think there's like a 120-pound rating on the clip. So you can make an average dumbbell into a kettlebell. And since I'm about 6'3" or about 192 centimeters, a kettlebell like that, even with a dumbbell that's 30 pounds, is not going to be too encumbersome for myself. If you're shorter, have shorter limbs, something like that might not work as well. So a lot of body weight. The pull-up bar is clutch for me. The resistance bands. I haven't really had a chance to go to the gym, just with having kids and being married, a physical job, doing this stuff, as well as working different jobs on top of it, doing counseling gigs or speaking opportunities. I don't usually get out to the gym. I just do a lot of my own stuff with the resistance bands, the pull-up bar, a lot of body weight exercises, but you can get healthy doing that stuff. I am not in peak physical condition. I'm not what I was 5 years ago before I had kiddos, but I definitely am in a healthier state. So my constant calorie, loss and so on and so forth, uh, our deficit is not what it used to be. I am eating more to maintain the energy that I have to make the long drives, to have those better connections with the people around me, and I do eat and connect with people at church more on a consistent basis. But I feel healthier for it, and I want to be the best mindset for my kiddos and for the people around me. And until things, hopefully drastically shift, whether it's on this platform or doing more social work and moving away from the physical work that I do, then hopefully I'll be able to move towards the gym on a more consistent basis. I've never been skinny my whole life. I just love food too much. I feel you, living. I really do. I was a big dude for a long. I was about 305 pounds, 310 pounds for a long time, and I would fluctuate between like 250, 260, and then get up to about there. And uh, it was only when I really started viewing my body as a temple of the Lord's, and I really started thinking about what I was putting into my body and the ratio of putting the stuff into my body, it started to change the way I thought and I lived. And that's given me the energy as a 40-year-old to be able to pump out, these 18-hour days and do the best that I can. Uh, do you look after your blood pressure constantly? Not constantly, but once every, month or two, I'll take a look, the machines that they have in the area. It used to be way more. If you look back at my videos, I have almost 400 videos now on there. But I used to take my blood work, my blood sugar levels, and my the blood pressure machine, and I'd go see my doctor every 6 months during the weight loss time. Now it's more just maintaining health, feeling out my body, and just just eating better in general. So I do feel you on the eating. The burgers, the pizza, the shawarma, as you're saying, living. But I will tell you this: so the three things you listed, I know carbs are not the enemy at all, but it's changing maybe the small things, right? Like if you're gonna have a shawarma, that's fantastic, but maybe have a shawarma plate sometimes. Move away from the wrap itself, or get a thin wrap if possible. Move towards making your own pizzas at home with fresh toppings, using maybe more chicken, using cheese, really delicious cheese. Like I use the lower fat cheese, but I use a ton of it, and I love putting a lot of the marble cheese on, and it just like it's 10 grams of protein for 100 calories, right? So, I'm not losing too much when you get, 20 grams for chicken breast, and you're getting maybe 24, 25 grams of protein for a protein shake. To have that cheese on a very thin pita, and I have gluten allergies, so I have to watch out for that as well. My body's up and down on that end. So, yeah, you just have to be, very mindful to just think about foods that are satiating. And we had a bad problem with the food pyramid scale. I don't agree with everything that RFK is talking about, but the reverse pyramid that was funny enough, South Park 15 years ago or 17 years ago, I think it was 2008, or yeah, anyway, 18 years ago, where they're now talking about having more dairy, more fats, more proteins, having fruits and vegetables, and then not as much carbs. I think that is something that I didn't understand, which is satiation. If you can get satiated, if you can eat foods that have, a good healthy fat source and good protein, if I had known this 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, my body would be in a much better state, because I needed a lot more protein. I was only getting about 110, 120 grams of protein for years on end, and I jacked it up to about 180 to 200 for the past 6 months, and I can see the body composition changing. I still have fat on my body. I'm never gonna be a guy who can probably show his abs off or anything like that, but I feel strong. I feel good, and I do feel like I'm gaining muscle, which is great for being 40 years old. So and on nothing, obviously. Look like I'm on anything. Anyways, so yeah, how much calories should you look to burn for each week? I'd say conservatively, you never want to go over a pound, losing a pound per week. I'd say that's a bit extreme. Anything more than that. So just basically break it down like this. There's 3,500 calories in a pound if you were looking at it just straight math, not dealing with stress factor. You're going to continue to gain weight even if you eat almost nothing or very little because your body chemically will change drastically if you're stressed, if you're not sleeping properly, and if you're not eating properly. So, you got to just work out within your means, eat within your means, get the higher amount of proteins, get those satiating foods. But if we're talking about pure math, let's say I don't know, your height and weight, but let's just say you burn on average 2,500 calories per day. You do some workouts, you have semi-active life, your resting metabolic rate versus, your active metabolic rate. Say you get up to 2,800 calories. So that means if you didn't eat for an entire day, you would eventually not lose muscle, but you would not be gaining muscle or maintaining your muscle per se. It would be starting to work on your muscles and your fat a bit. That'd be 2,800 calories, it's almost a pound. So if you did maybe 500 or 600 calories at a loss, within the 7 days, that's around a pound. And if you added in a little bit more cardio and you kept it around the, let's say you're at 2,800 calories per day, and there's going to be a very minimal bump up, even if you put a lot of work in, which sucks about our body. Our body is so great at survival. So you're not going to eat if you eat, say you burn a ton of calories, you go biking for 4 hours, you might only get 300 or 400, maybe 500 calories extra total for the day because your body is constantly trying to fight to keep a rigid way of living for survival. So let's just say you're at, say, 2,900 calories total on the day. There's calculators, you can do the math based off of your exercise level, based off of your height, your weight, your age, so on and so forth. So if you're doing all that and you end up calculating and being very smart about getting good fats, good proteins, good carbs, fruits and vegetables in, and you get it to like, say, 2,300 calories per day, you'll lose probably about a pound a week, right? And that's just straight up math. Now, that will slowly a little bit decrease your metabolism. That's also because you're hopefully losing weight as well. But my suggestion to you would be 5 days of like maybe 600 calories a loss or 700 calories loss to do one day of, just around level eating. And if you eat an extra dessert on, let's say, Sunday, so be it, right? So I would say trying to get to about losing almost a pound per week is probably the best place to be. But everybody's vastly different, and I appreciate you asking the questions you have. If there are any other questions, fantastic. If not, I will cap off the night. Okay. So if you would like to watch anything, sorry, if you would like to watch, oh, sorry, if, I got an if out of you, living, are we going if? Sorry, I saw hesitation on the typing there. All right. I'll just finish up then. If you'd like to watch another podcast from the podcast and vodcast, I'm gonna have to do that again. If you'd like to watch another podcast or vodcast that of the interviews that I've done lately, please take a look at the playlist up here. I just want to say thank you, Aaron, for being here, and thank you everyone for watching. I pray that you have a wonderful day, evening, morning, or night. God bless.